Last week's was a pretty heavy topic. There was lots of things in it. This week, it's a more focused topic, more focused, and that is personnel policies or policies in general. Essentially, when you're running a business or when you start a business or if you're managing a business, it doesn't matter what you fall into, you'll run into a situation where things happen with people. People show up late, or people do an exceptionally good job, people do a poor job. There needs to be some form of discipline action. These sorts of things that go on in organizations that have people. It's common. It's just the nature of people dealing with people. So the idea of putting in a policy, even though a lot of people win the word policy, is supposed to standard response. And the idea of a standard response is that it everyone fairly. They may not like how they're treated in the sense of getting a disciplinary letter is not going to be for joy for that sort of. However, people will look at one another and say, well, I got the same thing that you got when I did the same thing. So this section here, looking at policies, communicating policies, ensuring that the policies are brought forth to the employees in a standard format. People need to be rewarded for good. So say, for example, you did an exceptionally good job. It always feels good to be rewarded for it or acknowledged for it in some way or another. If you fall short of the expectations, first of all, you have to be clear what the expectations are. Second of all, you expect some sort of a consequence from that. That's the accountability aspect of a job, and absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're a professional, for example, whether it's a plumber or electrician or a duty mechanic, people's lives could be on the line if you don't do right. The tasks that we do act not only on ourselves, but on other people. So having a job done right is very, very important. And having policies in place to ensure that jobs are done right is equally important. So regardless of the outcome, people must appreciate a consistent approach to decision making, so that people can feel that they're being treated fairly. Having written policies contributes to this consistency and provide a clear, consistent sense of direction to employees and employers. It works both ways. It lays out a path for how we handle challenges. So in this section, we'll look more closely at developing and using written policies in the workplace. But we think about developing policies. Okay, the first thing we need to do is think about, why do we need a policy? Well, what is the driver for this? The policies establish basic expectations. What is it we expect of the employee? It clarifies to the employee what level they need to go to. And it should provide clear guidance on how to consistently handle workplace situations as they arise. A lot of training goes on, for example, in customer service organizations or large customer service organizations, and how to handle difficult customers. It's an art in and of itself, but you need to have some sort of guidance on that. The average person coming into a workplace does not know how to do that. And a policy and procedure on how best to deal with this is often useful for people who come into a new shop and have had little experience with this. We'll also find that as business grows, you're going to need to develop more personnel policies. Sick leave, time off, breaks, holidays, maternity leave, bereavement, things like that. These situations typically crop up in organizations, and it's important that we create a consistent environment so that everybody gets treated consistently, and that we assure that no one feels as if they're being treated unfairly. And the worst case scenario would be someone brings you to court because you've treated them wrongly for one reason or another. Without a policy, you don't have much of a leg to stand on. So how do you do this? What is the process? And really, it's not overly complicated in terms of the process. We got it down to a 4-step process here. The first step, don't do anything that you don't need to do. Recognize a need. So What do you need a policy in? Well, it depends on your organization. Every organization is going to be different. Depends on how many people you have, how much personnel policies you're going to need. If you've got 1 or 2 people, you probably don't need a comprehensive policy. If you're an organization like college and you're pushing 1,000 employees, you certainly need policies, okay? So it depends on the size of the organization. But what they do when it is written down, it provides a clear guideline that is unarguable. It is written in black and white. And it's unarguable, but it's also consistent. People are very clear of what the rules are. So it helps ensure this fairness, and it helps ensure legal compliance too, to make sure that we do things in a certain way. So, for example, a sexual harassment policy or a harassment policy more generally. Creating policies do take some time, no doubt about it, but there's lots of examples of policies out there that you can draw from. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel on a lot of these things. They're widely available. So what we're going to do is focus on policies that create the right fit for us. And if you can reasonably foresee it, that helps you be more proactive. What kind of policies you're going to need. If you got 3 or 4 employees and neither one of them are women, well, pregnancy leave is probably not a high priority for you. Whereas if 3 or 4 of them are childbearing women, childbearing age, you can anticipate that at somewhere along the line, that's going to have to become an important issue for you. So, you ask yourself, do I need a policy for that? Do I not need a policy for that? Well, you really need to kind of look at it from a checkbox point of view. First of all, an employee's behavior suggests that there's confusion about what's appropriate for the job. Whenever you get a situation where you got an employee that's hard and they don't know what they're at, or they don't appear to know what they're at, it's one thing to tell them, no doubt about it, and that's probably the first route you want to go, is to tell them. But when you have it written down, it allows you to reinforce it and to bring that consistency to it. So think about personal protective equipment, dress code, work hours, cell phone usage, travel expenses, codes of conduct. These are all things that, well, they can be a little intimidating for people in the very in-depth sense, but generally you can explain, okay, you got to wear hard steel nose boots and a hard hat and protective goggles. But okay, you've listed off 3 things. Maybe there's other things there. Writing it down certainly allows you to not miss anything and allows the employee not to miss anything. A written personnel policy, too, is a very much of a CYA document in the sense that it provides you legal protection. From the employer's point of view, if you have clearly articulated these are rules, and that an employee then does not follow those rules, you can point to it and say, well, we did very clearly have the rules laid out. The employee was very clearly made aware of the rules, but the employee did not follow the rules. Also, government laws often lay down policies that you need to be aware of. So, for example, harassment policies, equitable treatment of employees in terms of hiring equity, human rights legislation. All those things are very clearly laid in government policy. You and your employees need to be absolutely aware that those exist. And I don't know if you need to know the fine detail, but you certainly need to know the broad strokes of it. And this is why, when we think about the training that goes on for a lot of employees now for WHMIS, for example, I think we've all done WHMIS training. So you need to know about hazardous chemicals in the workplace and the worker rights, the employer rights, what the employees are expected to do, what the employer is supposed to do, how things are going to be handled. Well, WHMIS is very much a policy, and it allows you to write down and clearly articulate and communicate what the rules are. Most importantly, this provides this consistency. So if we can first recognize a need in our organization, we can write it down, create a policy, communicate the policy to the employees, abide by the policy, have consequences for not abiding by the policy, and then with that in place, that will certainly help us treat people equitably and make the organization work more smoothly. The second step that we really need to do, okay, when we recognize the need for a policy, as I said to you, there's loads of examples of policies out there on the internet. You don't really have to go building your own. You can go and look for what else exists. So you really need to consult what other organizations are doing in this realm. There's a lot of ideas out there. And as I say, a simple internet search would give you a lot of that. And that will allow you to more easily develop the policy. You're going to look at what are organizations doing, what are their policies, and to be able to use their policies as templates. So as a starting point, consider policies of other organizations. Also consider the nature of the business that you're in and how much of a policy you really need. Write the policies in clear language, especially in terms of the language of the workplace, in your workplace. And think about what the intention of the policy is and the behavior that is expected. To allow some degree of flexibility, consider using words such as generally or typically or usually or may so that it doesn't constrict you too much. The typical components you should include in all policies: a statement of purpose. Why in the heck does this policy exist is really what a statement of purpose is. And it outlines why the organization is issuing the policy and the desired effect. We got to think about what are the policy specifications. In other words, what are the measures that you will use in order to tell if the policy has been broken or not. Okay, so this section includes the detail of the specific regulations, requirements, organizational behavior standards that the policy is creating. So it lays the benchmark for which we address behavior. If the behavior falls below the expected level as stated in the policy, then action can be taken. If it doesn't fall below, no action is taken. The implementation section. This section indicates who's responsible for carrying it out. And that's always a bit of an issue in organizations. So you got to think, who's responsible for this now? Who's responsible for ensuring that the policy is in place? And if someone is clearly responsible for it and clearly named, for example, the manager of the office is responsible for that, that means the manager of the office knows that it is his or her role and responsibility to make sure that these policies are communicated and enforced. Also, too, policies tend to have some sort of a date attached to them because policies often get rewritten. I'm on council here in Clarenville, and we've gone through an extensive reorganization of our policies over the course of the summer. And that has been an interesting learning because we look back at policies that were written probably 15 years ago, and we say, well, things have changed. You know, this policy may not apply anymore or may not include what is on the go today. You think about, for example, I recall one dealing with payment of fees, okay? So, you know, how do we accept payments? How do we accept payments in the town? Well, yeah, credit cards were heard tell of, checks were heard tell of, but online banking or electronic transfer was not envisaged when the policy was written. So those things now have been added to the policy. So that's the second thing, developing the content of the policy. And that's, you know, once you recognize you need it, that's a task that is not as hard as it used to be because you can easily search out these things now. Here's an example that I just pulled of a typical small business simple policy, okay, that follows these guidelines. So, for example, a statement of purpose, policy specifications, implementation, and effective date. So here we go. This is a policy for work hours. In order to ensure our customer needs are met, the storefront will be open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. So there's a statement of purpose. You know, this is why we're putting this in place. Is we got to be able to let our customers in the store. Something as simple as that. The normal work week for our organization shall consist of 5 7-hour days. Ordinarily, work hours are from 9 to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, including 1 hour unpaid lunch. Employees may request the opportunity to vary their work schedules within the employer-defined limits to better accommodate personal responsibilities. Subject to whatever, work assignments and owner shall determine the hours of employee that best suits the needs of the work to be done by the individual employee. So again, that one clears out that the assignment and the owner dictates what the employee is assigned to do, not the employee. And you'll notice that was dated September 2019. So This organization must have had some challenges with work hours or anticipated some challenges with work hours, so it wrote this little policy. And if we think about it, having read the policy, we know now that the store is going to be open from 9 to 5, that the normal work week runs for 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, 7-hour days from 9 to 5. And that there is an unpaid lunch, and also that there is some degree of flexibility allowed for people on their schedules with consultation with the employer. This will be the example of a typical policy. The third and probably most important part, once you've got the policy written, and let's say, for example, this is the policy we wrote right here. Once you've got the policy written, you really need to be able to communicate that to the employees. Without it being communicated to the employees, it's not an effective policy. If nobody knows about it, it will never be able to be enforced. Okay? So when communicating the policy, it's important to give your employees a rationale of why you're putting the policy in place. That's important because everybody will tend to get their back up unless they can see that there's a clear rationale for it. Now, in the case of this one back here, the clear rationale is that, if the store is open 9 to 5, you need someone behind the counter between 9 and 5. So that's the sort of thing that we're talking about in terms of something making it relevant to the employees or relevant to why we're putting this in place. So employees should be given enough details to make your position as the employer clear. Why are we doing this? New policies may generate questions or suggestions, so it's important to give your employees an opportunity to ask questions about the policy, suggest anything that could probably make it a little better. So it's good to have a draft policy before you actually go full bore into a policy. As your business grows and times change, you're going to consider reviewing and changing the policies. It's only natural that policies will change over time. They're very much a living document. Finally, and again, we talk about the level of importance. You've got a policy, you've communicated it to your employees. It's utmost important that it be consistently used. If you ignore the policy, you're basically saying that we don't have a policy at all, because you can't employ the policy on one occasion and not on another. That will defeat the whole purpose of the policy. So if you're going to develop and communicate a policy, it's important that you use it. So consistent application of the policy will ensure the staff are clear to rules and the consequences for ignoring them. It only makes sense. Policies are often put into a single document. And I always like the idea of a 3-ring binder. If we're thinking about a traditional approach to writing policy, a 3-ring binder allows you to add, delete, change policies very easily as opposed to putting it in a printed document. It's also very important if you're going to be online. If you put it on a web page, that can be updated fairly easily too. So you need something that's updatable. What the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has done is they put together what's called the ABCs of Building an Employee Handbook, which is a useful little template that you can use if you wanted to build a book of policies as opposed to one policy. Okay, this is a combination of policies. This is a handbook, and as I say, the handbook is given to employees and new employees when they start work, and it lays out what the expectations are, the policies, the general questions that people will be thinking, answering the general questions that people will be thinking when they come to work to a workplace. So this one here, you can edit it to meet your own needs. So I just want to look at the table of contents. So we got a little bit of a background on the business, okay? Letter from the owner. The name of the business, what is our mission? What do we do? Which is the mission, really. What is it we do? And what do we value? And a lot of organizations include a statement of values, truth, honesty, these sorts of things. The content itself, the Working Conditions Handbook, outlines a bunch of policies with regards to a whole bunch of topics that people would be interested in knowing as they join an organization. What's the probationary period? We talked about the probationary period last week. How long am I going to be working here before I can feel secure in my job, in the sense that I can prove myself and the employer continues to hire me? What is my pay? What is compensation? When is it paid? How much is it? What are the deductions? What options do I have? Other employee benefits. How timesheets are filled out. Work schedule, break periods, and meals when they happen. Absence or lateness. What are the consequences of that? Overtime. How's it paid? What are we dealing with? What holidays are paid? Vacations, maternity and parental leave, sick leaves, and other conditional policies. Now, some of these, for example, vacation, is already dictated in terms of minimum standards, as we've discussed this a couple weeks ago. There are minimum standards laid out in the Newfoundland and Labrador, or any province in Canada, it doesn't need to be the Newfoundland and Labrador, Labor Standards Act. So the Labor Standards Act states the minimum. So you need, for example, a minimum of 2 weeks holidays in a year. These minimums can always be surpassed by a company. A company, if they want, can offer 3 weeks holidays, 4 weeks holidays, 5. There's nothing to prevent any of that, but they can't offer any less than the minimum. So with this handbook, someone coming into an organization can look at this and find out what this particular organization is offering. And it's a good recruitment tool. If you think about, if we talk about recruiting people want to know, is this a nice place to work? What kind of policies are there things that I would like here? For example, longer vacation than what is laid out in legislation would be helpful.